Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I hope your Thanksgiving weekend was a safe one and that you had some valuable time for yourself and for your family. I'm really looking forward to tonight's broadcast. I decided to insert it in the middle of the series that I've been doing on my new book because I thought it was timely. I'm going to talk a little bit about navigating wilderness therapy during the holidays and during the winter time. So you're welcome to submit any questions to Malia about that. You're also welcome to submit any questions about navigating the holidays as you might be at home or might not have a child in wilderness therapy. Tonight's title is Navigating the Holidays, Tradition, Family, and Regression. Um, I think it's important that there's going to be a consistent theme throughout the broadcast this evening. And that theme is going to be about compassion toward yourself. There's a quote that sometimes is attributed to the Buddha and sometimes it's attributed to Jack Kornfield. And I've tried to research and find out who said it. But it doesn't matter. It's the same. It's the idea that matters. He says, if your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. And I think that that's a really important thing to think about tonight is that the practice of self-compassion, of understanding ourselves through the compassionate lens of psychology, in fact, can be a very healing aspect in our lives. And so tonight, as we talk about what the holidays are like, there's so much. All of you know this, especially if you've been in wilderness or if you have a child with us in wilderness right now, that that part of the challenge is the expectations that the holidays should be something, anything, that there should be gratitude during the Thanksgiving holiday, that there should be a feeling of family and home during the December holidays. And like almost everything that we look at, it is our expectation on the front end that often determines how much satisfaction, how much joy that we'll get out of the experience, whether it be marriage or whether it be having a child or adopting a child or whether it be celebrating the holidays. So the first thing tonight, if there's nothing else that you hear from me tonight, it is that you get to have your own experience with the holidays. And that nobody, including me or any therapist, ought to dictate to you how it should feel. And so if there are questions tonight that come up with specifically how to navigate your specific circumstances, a lot of it is going to be encouraging you to kind of search deeply and find out what's in your heart. And I'll talk about, of course, some principles that will help you to navigate it. But in terms of advice, I don't have a lot. I'm also borrowing tonight from a blog that I wrote a couple of years ago that I've referred to in the last two broadcasts, where I wrote why you shouldn't go home for Thanksgiving. And I'm going to expand that, of course, to relate not just to Thanksgiving, but to all the holidays or any celebrations. One of my favorite quotes about family is from the late Guru Ram Dass, where he says, if you think you are enlightened, go spend a week with your family. I can relate to this because I have a lot of experiences where, because I teach a lot about children and family and relationships, there's this assumption that I navigate it well. And sometimes I navigate it very, very poorly. In fact, sometimes people will ask me the question in therapy. You might ask this question of your therapist: what would you do in this circumstance or this situation? And often my answer is, well, I guess it depends. If I were doing well, I might do it this certain way. But if I were struggling or I were depleted, I might react very, very poorly. And so I'm not sure if the reference of what I would do or not do is a good place to measure yourself against, a good way to measure yourself against. Everybody's family can be triggering, whether you're a guru or an accountant or a nurse. Everybody's family can be challenging. Everybody's family, especially as we grow up and out of our families and then go back and visit them or take a phone call from them or exchange an email with them. Everybody's family it has an ability to pull us back down into a regressive place. That's a main message of this evening, that we're going to there's a comedian who said one time something along the lines of, it doesn't matter if you're the CEO of a major corporation, when you go home for a home visit, you're still the younger brother or sister of somebody who was tricked into drinking their own urine. You know, when you recognize this because you can watch it in your spouse, you can watch it in your children. If you can bypass the shame and the guilt of that often comes with our own evaluation of ourselves, you can observe this in yourself. My wife would tell you that sometimes when I'm interacting with my family of origin, that I look and sound many years younger than I am, that I regress to a less evolved, less emotionally mature place. Regression is real. Triggers for regression are real. And the holidays or celebrations, rituals, family traditions, all of those are ripe for regression. So I know that the Hallmark people tell us that we're supposed to feel a certain way and look forward to it with certain emotions. But in therapy, the lens of therapy suggests to us that we look at it much more in a much more integrated way, in a much more complete way. Let's talk about family events and kind of navigating these holidays. First and foremost, like I said, be kind to yourself. If you know, if you recognize, if you bring with you the idea that I just shared from Ram Dass and the idea that the holidays and traditions are ripe for regression, being patient with yourself can help you navigate some of the triggers. You can become flexible in your responses. That's a neurological idea about response flexibility. You're less likely to pile on top of yourself shame and embarrassment for regression. So you're able to keep yourself out of the lowest depths of it. Be kind to yourself. One thing I talk about, and I'll talk about this later in the article that I quote, that I wrote a couple of years ago, is observe your stress level. One of my favorite things in working with families or individuals and families is when there's an opportunity for somebody to go back to visit their family of origin, their parents, their adult siblings. I love to hear their observations. I love to hear how they notice old patterns emerging in them, feelings coming up for them. So as the holidays approach, no matter what your circumstances are, watch yourself. Watch what comes up for you. Practice. The invitation is at least to be mindful of what's going on inside of you. Expectations. You know, I was listening to a clinician recently teach about adoption. And in the lesson, one of the things that he was teaching is about this idea that, you know, we don't necessarily suggest to adoptive children some sort of gratitude, that they would be grateful for having been adopted because it was likely that the circumstances of their biological parents were so compromised that they wouldn't have had the same kind of life. You all know that idea. You've heard that idea. And so the trainer, the psychologist, was teaching this, and as he was explaining, he says we don't do that when working with adopted children in families that have adoption. We don't suggest to them. We don't offer an idea about how we expect them to feel. And one of the things that I was talking to him about with afterwards is I think we don't do that with virtually anything, do we? I mean, it's not unique to adoptive children. It's not unique to any one circumstance. I remember years ago, I was talking with my therapist who happens to be transgender. And I was contrasting her transition because I was her client during her transition and kind of my observations of her transition. She was very flexible. If people misgendered her, for example, she didn't take offense at it and didn't feel very, very triggered or even inclined to correct them at times. Almost never, actually. And I was contrasting that with some of the young people that I work with and how it can be very triggering for them to be misgendered. They can feel very not seen if people misgender them, especially if there's a pattern of misgendering them. And so I brought this question to my therapist years into her transition and said, I'm just curious about this experience I'm having as a therapist in the wilderness where the children seem to be kind of triggered by this, very, very compromised by somebody misgendering them. And then you saying to her, you don't seem to let it matter. And I was about to ask some sort of question like, is it my role to kind of help them get to where you are? Should I share with them? Should I encourage them? Should I teach them that the more evolved they become, the less they'll react to other people? And even before I answered the question, especially because it had a should in it, she said to me, I think the thing is to meet people where they're at. And that's a fundamental idea tonight. When we welcome our children into our home, when we invite our children or our siblings into our home, when we're invited into the home of our extended family or our family of origin, it feels best to everybody if you are welcomed, if who you are is welcomed. If you, for example, are a part of the LGBTQ community, if you're single into a certain age, whatever it is, if you're struggling to kind of find your way in your career, whatever it is, the optimal circumstance is that you get welcomed, that you get seen, and that you're allowed to show up as you are. So that obviously, that idea applies both to you as the visitors to somebody else's home, but also as the host to somebody else's home. That you can be there for them and meet them where they're at is the ideal. Watch for in these examples for regression. Notice it. Observe it. Try the invitation. The idea is to try to observe it without judgment. Judgment on top of regression, judgment on top of symptomology exacerbates the regression in the symptomology. If you have shame and guilt, if you have disdain toward yourself because of your mental health symptoms, your regression, you're going to be less able to address it, because the goal will be to deny it, to repress it, to push it down, to push it away, to run away from it. It is leaning into. See, this is the thing about Evoke that we talk about and teach. Most often we're talking about leaning into the issue. That's why we make such an emphasis to not make this a behavioral program where we want to understand not the right answer from our clients, but we want to understand the honest answer from our clients. And the honest answer often isn't right. The honest answer is often unacceptable to many people. Notice that alcohol consumption lowers one's inhibitions and level of emotional functioning, even 1 or 2 drinks. The idea here is that you might not observe a family member to be intoxicated. But I just want to remind you, in case you forget, that a family member who even has 1 or 2 drinks will often experience a lowering of inhibitions and start saying things that can be hurtful, can be unkind, can be reactive. I talk about containing all the time, and about how containing is one part of the equation of intimacy, where I hold space for you. Alcohol diminishes our capacity for containment. Alcohol kind of releases gives us access to our triggers, to our reactions. We become unfiltered. I think people sometimes say that alcohol, we say the truth, but that's not exactly right. It's not like we're telling the truth when we drink. It's that we lose our capacity to hold space for other people. So notice that if you have alcohol in your family, even if there's not overt alcoholism, notice that 1 or 2 drinks, having an emotional conversation with any kind of emotional density to it, depth to it, with somebody who has 1 or 2 drink, can be a risky endeavor. Notice shame and guilt and differentiation. Differentiation, I use this term all the time. Differentiation in psychology and relationship theory, family systems theory, is the balance between self and other. My name is Brad Reedy. So there's a Brad part of me, right, who I am, and there's a Reedy part of me, who I am in this family, the family that I created and the family that I was raised in. And differentiation says that both of those things can coexist adequately, that they don't compromise each other, that one doesn't have to be sacrificed in some large part to make space for the other. I can be me, and I can also connect to those things, those traditions, those rituals, which are Reedy rituals, Reedy traditions. Watch out for overdoing and overspending. I think a lot of parents, I've noticed this in wilderness therapy. We run a program for families that have children in treatment over the holidays. And I've noticed that overspending, overgiving often is a guilt induced behavior. If somehow I can make up for it, if I can, my worth is what I can give, not just emotionally and psychologically, but also financially. So again, it's an invitation. All of this is an invitation to look at yourself, to ask yourself questions. Give yourself and others permission to practice boundaries. That's that idea about that I was just talking about with differentiation. I say this all the time, and it's been tested, by the way, in my life. But I say all the time that if my children, my adult children, discovered in their own work in therapy or wherever their work was done, that being around me felt toxic to them, I would 10 times out of 10 support them in taking the space that they need. If a client came to me and said, being around my mother, being around my father, my siblings is toxic to me, you better believe that I would be supportive of them doing what they needed to do to take care of themselves. Now, after saying that, here's the important point. If that is your approach, why would they not want to be around you in the long run? If they get to be themselves, and in this one instance, if being themselves means that they have to take some space, they're never going to want to be too far away. Many, many parents have asked me questions about children who are estranged from them. Often young adults, of course. Adolescents, it's pretty hard to accomplish that because you're dependent upon your parents. But young adults or adults, parents have come to me and asked the question, what do I do? My son or my daughter says they don't want to have anything to do with me, or that they need to set boundaries or need to maintain some distance, or that they don't trust me. Whatever the reasoning, the thought process is, it's that estrangement. And what I encourage them to do is to say, I'm glad you can take care of yourself, and I'll take care of myself. And of course, I'll miss you, but if it's important to you, I support you. And you must have a good reason for not trusting me. In fact, thank you for telling me that you don't trust me. Because that, I can imagine that could be hard or risky. I might try to talk you out of it. I might want to tell you why I should be trusted. And that's our instinct, isn't it? When somebody says, I don't know if I can trust you, I don't know if I feel safe around you, our instincts are to try to build a case where we're trustworthy and we're a safe person. But ironically, a trustworthy person, a safe person, honors the other. And I'm not saying you allow them to abuse you, but taking space is not abuse. And even if they're doing it to manipulate, giving them that space, taking them at face value. I love this idea in communication theory. When we take people in our lives at face value, we're teaching them that they have to use their words to communicate feelings. We are, in a kind of a behavioral sense, we are extinguishing passive or passive-aggressive behavior by taking people at face value. So give yourself, which might even be harder, give yourself and others permission to practice boundaries. I've said this recently, that it wasn't until my late 40s, and that, to me, this sentence is absolutely an amazing sentence to utter. And I don't think I'm tremendously unique in this way. It took me until my late 40s to figure out that I didn't have to spend time around people during the holidays that I didn't want to spend time around. I didn't even know. I couldn't even imagine the option. And in some cases, I have been the one to take some space and to re-enter certain family relationships, family celebrations. Right? It's kind of an experiment with myself about what I need. So giving yourself permission, you know, you know that you're supported. You know that you're honored. You know that your self, that thing that I call a self, you know that that self in you is respected when you set a boundary with somebody and they respond with curiosity and support rather than trying to dismiss it or discount it or talk you out of it. Self-care is not a sin. And I think that unconsciously sometimes we're led to believe that. And it's okay to take care of yourself. Like I talk about in the article, I think there's a direct quote in there, like if you need a doctor's note, especially if you're going through a challenging time with your family. Even if some of these patterns that I'm describing tonight aren't consistent over time, taking some space from your family at a time when it might be best for you to do so, a family gathering, is okay. It's okay. And like I said earlier, experimenting with that is part of figuring yourself out. I think that's a pretty basic idea in being a human, isn't it? That we learn by experimentation, by trying things on for size. I talk about the choice of family. I talk about this idea that it's okay. It's okay for you to do what you need to do for yourself for the holidays. And if people have a difficult time, if they become reactive to that, they're just simply proving the point. One of my very favorite broadcasts that I've ever done, because I learn when I do these, every time I do these, I learn something, is the one on changing notions about what it means to be a good parent. A good parent, simply, and it's a little bit of an oversimplification, obviously, but two key ingredients to being a good parent are having a sense of self as a foundation. And then second is holding space for the other person's otherness, being able to honor, respect, see, and understand the other person's otherness. And I know this could sound dramatic, but I think that's the goal, is to find places where who we are is okay. And I know the fear that most people have because of our training, that if I just hang around people who accept me, maybe people don't care enough about me to help me to learn important lessons. That's not my experience. Truly being seen by a capable other, in my experience, is the only way to enact or facilitate lasting change. Shame and fear of rejection, fear of judgment, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to create lasting change in oneself, positive lasting change in oneself that's meaningful and deep. There's a story, I talk about this in The Audacity to Be You, about talking about family values versus parent values. I think a lot of times parents talk about family values as if the children have already incorporated them in. And in a session at one point, I noticed that a child challenged his parents by saying, those aren't family values, those are parents' values. And there's no disrespect in that. You're allowed to have values and to own them. And I think telling somebody what their values, what their beliefs are, is an intrusive kind of relationship. You can make invitations, you can ask questions, you can model, but you can't impose on somebody else. In fact, it wouldn't really be meaningful, would it, if it was just an imposition onto somebody? It really wouldn't be a choice for them. And there's no morality without choice, is there? I mean, logically speaking, it doesn't exist. Is it a safe place? That's what I'm talking about. the entire night so far is asking yourself, observing, trying it on for size. And sometimes, like I said, it took me till my late 40s to figure out that I was allowed to spend the holidays with the people that where I was most happy. So it took me most of my life to have the idea and the courage to be able to fight against the guilt that said to me that I had an obligation to do what other people thought I should do. Isn't that an interesting thing to realize that at my age? And then in ways we're asking our children to do the same kind of thing. Do you, and I qualify this, do all of you, who you are, feel welcomed? Again, there's a fairly significant political cultural divide in this country. It's if you don't know that, you're not paying attention. I think everybody knows that. But that doesn't mean that we can't respond to other people with compassion and also require compassion, even through the differences. What are your shared values? What do you share with your family? What are the things that make you a Smith or a Johnson or a Reedy? Can we celebrate those? To go or not to go. I'm not talking about the pandemic. The pandemic is presenting its own challenges because I think for many of us, probably in the United States, the public health experts are going to recommend very limited travel, if any at all. So I'm not talking about that, but it's not automatic. Maybe you get to spend time by yourself during the holidays. Maybe you can take a vacation to a tropical area, to a tropical place. You're allowed to do any of that. And like I said, if you're still curious, if you want to experiment, or maybe the guilt is still too strong and you can't even conceive of the idea that you're allowed to choose to opt out of a family tradition or experience, then you can learn from it and observe and see. I think that's an important part of the process. Rituals create kind of they turn up the volume on our values. Rituals and ceremonies are a way of kind of creating a symbolic, experiential kind of activity to solidify and underscore our values. The question becomes, is everybody's belief system honored? Are you a Jewish family where you have a non-Jewish or a child who's decided that they want to leave the faith, or a Christian, or vice versa, or any combination in between? A Muslim. Are you dealing with a child who's agnostic? Whatever it is. Do you have somebody's new partner from a different faith or belief system? And can that be okay with you? Can you welcome them? I mean, ultimately, you're making a choice, really, to welcome your child, to welcome your family member. One of the questions that we've talked about is talk to each other about co-creating rituals. Ask the children what they might want to do. Obviously, the younger the child, the less creative or less input that they might even desire to have in the process. But as children grow older and become teens and late teens and young adults, ask them about it. It was many years before members of my family respected my belief system that I worked really, really hard to uncover and develop in myself. And when they finally did, with the smallest of gestures, it was overwhelmingly a wonderful feeling of feeling joy and love for them and from them. Consider changing old rituals that don't make sense anymore. I think that there is an idea in families where we have this kind of this loyalty, this idea about loyalty, that we have to maintain sameness, same relationships. We can't say goodbye to old relationships. We can't say goodbye to old activities. Those things give us some meaning and some groundedness. But this idea tonight is that it's okay to experiment and try something new and to let go of some old things. So here's the link to the article that I'm going to be quoting for a few slides here coming now, but I want to share it with you. It's if you go to drbradreedy.com and you search on my blogs, the one that I'm describing tonight is why you shouldn't go home for Thanksgiving. For tonight's purposes, we're going to be substituting Thanksgiving for any of the holidays, any of the family celebrations that happen here during this season. The first quote is this: I talked about how to maintain your compassion for struggling family members instead of taking irritating and hurtful questions personally. I was attending an interview on the radio, and I was asked a question about the holidays, and I focused on how you can let it bounce off of you, roll off your back. So I talked about how to maintain your compassion for struggling family members instead of taking irritating and hurtful questions personally. While this practice can be effective in helping avoid hurt, anger, and conflict, it is not the only way to deal with the divisive family members. I had missed what was in front of me. I was sitting during this interview in a studio of somewhere between about 15 other people, all of whom lived in New York City away from their family of origin. I was also a visitor to New York, but all of these were residents of New York, and every single one of them, as a part of their journey, I'm sure from many different perspectives, made their way to living in New York City because that was the place for them to be. The holidays can be what my therapist calls elevator events. They tend to trigger regression. No matter your success or your stage of life, visiting family can reduce you to the 16-year-old kid who competed with his siblings and who found it necessary to fight his parents on every issue to maintain his sense of separateness. Again, watch your children. Can you be patient with their regression when their elevator goes several floors lower? I go on to write, sometimes it can seem like a forced and contrived exercise in gratitude, speaking of Thanksgiving. What if one is struggling with depression and gratitude is elusive? What if one is mourning the death of a close friend or the loss of marriage? Is there space in this holiday or any of the holidays for these people, for what you're feeling, for what you bring to it? Many report a great deal of depression around the holidays for this reason. They feel an obligation to feel happy and grateful and would rather spend the holiday alone than with others where they feel compelled to put on a happy face. Holidays are anniversaries that can remind us of the loss of family members. The first Thanksgiving after mom dies might be difficult for many in the family, and no two family members are ever grieving in the same way or the same version of the person. You hear the themes in it. The idea is, can we love otherness? Can we provide space for them? Can we allow people to show up as they are? I remember this has happened many, many times, but I remember one of the early times that it happened to me where a parent of one of the children in our program who reported that they had a very supportive extended family, siblings, the parent, this is the parent, siblings and their parents, the grandparents of the child in our program, but how they were finding it increasingly difficult to talk to their family because their family's members were asking questions and updates and information, and they were dealing with their own crisis, right? You know that old saying that if somebody shows up to your crisis with their baggage, it's just too much. And they were saying that they found themselves having to write a family email and asking family members for some space. And some of those family members, some family members in those situations will tell you, it's not good for you to be alone. You shouldn't isolate. You need to talk about this. Those kinds of ideas aren't consistent with mental health. Me knowing what you should do. I can share you with what's worked for me. But if you get very clear about your boundary and I try to erase it, that's a me problem. So holidays are a place that you get to be you also. Even I talk about this all the time. If you find yourself that listen to this, if you find yourself especially anxious about communicating a boundary to somebody in your life, a family member, that's likely evidence that it's not safe. Just the fear that you feel. Now, it could be argued that you can try it, see how it goes. But the fear is something to pay attention to. If you're afraid that your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your son or your daughter, your spouse is going to get reactive when you express your truth, that says something. My mother tells me this story that when she was probably much younger than I am now, she was probably at the time in her late 30s or 40s, that she had invited her parents to a therapy session. So I was a young child, unaware that this was going on. I know about the time because my mother was single at this time. So I know about the time frame that it was at. And she brought her mother and her father in. These were, her parents went through the Depression, very, very conservative, stoic people, very matter of fact people. And she brought her two parents, my grandparents, into the session. And as they started to talk about issues, my grandparents became very cold and angry. Had an indignance. They were indignant about why they would be called into family therapy, especially after all they had done for my mother, especially after all they were doing for my mother while she was raising us children alone, and how much my grandparents helped. And they stormed out with their indignance, and they said some harsh things, and the session was a disaster. But my mother tells me this. Even recently, she reminded me of this. The wisdom of the therapist was to say to my mother, I get it now. I see it. You're not making it up. Do you see how that experience with experimentation, even though it was painful, and I wouldn't wish that on my mother, for her to go through that, she was reminded of the reality of her life. My daughters told me that when I reacted to her one time very poorly in something that she shared with me after doing some of her work, that when I reacted poorly, that she was almost grateful. Because Dr. Brad Reedy, the author of the parenting book, messed up, and she sometimes fights herself to hold on to her truth. Traditions, like rituals, are patterns, things that we do over and over again. Like I talked about, it's the me and the we, the Brad and the Reedy. We allow for individual expression within a certain context or limitation. They give us a sense of belonging. They anchor us. They bring us back. They can be very positive in our lives. They can remind us of our values. They can invite a kind of mindfulness. What I think Thanksgiving is often can be thought of is a moment of gratitude and excuse me, a mindfulness about what we have, an invitation to remember. It can give us a sense of home, remind us of the positive aspects, the safe aspects of our attachment. It can add meaning and richness to our lives. Rituals amplify familial messages and love. Like I said earlier, ceremony and rituals add depth and volume to the experience. We love the predictability in a world that feels unsafe, in a world that challenges us. Excuse me, I have to cough again. Got a tickle in my throat. Predictability is something that we desire sometimes. You know, you like to watch a movie you've seen or a TV show you've seen. You like to listen to a song over and over again. There's something soothing about predictability. Watch for love and loyalty. Remember, love is not just about affection, or it's not just an emotion. It's an action. Love loses its value if somebody can be abusive but still express affection. I've worked with people who have sexually and physically abused others in their lives, but would claim that they love them. And they try to hang their hat on good intentions, and those have no good intentions in them except for to cover up the mental illness of the perpetrator. So watch for love and messages of loyalty that are out of balance. Like I talked about, they communicate balance and can bring us joy and happiness. So we go home if it welcomes us, all of us, or we go home if we want to see our family with new eyes, like I've described. We go home and come into contact with a younger version of ourselves. We go home to celebrate or remember, or we go home because we think it is the right thing to do and guilt prevents us from staying away. In the end, I hope that if you go home, you find that you, all of you, is welcome. And if you need therapeutic permission not to go home and instead spend your holiday with others who love you and value you, consider this your doctor's note. In the end, as a therapist, I invite you to explore all of your feelings, and perhaps this may also allow some gratitude to come through on a day in which we are often told that that is what we must feel. So you see the sensibility here in this very broadcast. It is the idea, the aspiration that you get to be respected as who you are and get to have your boundaries. And finding your tribe, finding your people means to find people who have those same kinds of values. Meaning not that they believe and think everything you believe and think, but that your individual expression is just as important as anything. I love this quote. I don't know where I got it, but it says your emotional growth and evolution will often expose the emotional immaturity of your parents. As we grow and push back, oftentimes our parents' inability to hold space for us will be exposed. And I know it's so easy, more for mothers, although it can happen to fathers and mothers. It's so easy to always translate self-help conversations like the ones that I give into the context of you as the parent, but you are also a child. So if you give yourself permission to honor the child in you, you can see that these things are true for you too. I'm going to actually skip this idea and just go to the take home, take some questions. What are the take home messages of this evening? Be gentle with yourself. Everybody regresses. Everybody has triggers. Old contexts pull things out of us. That goes for you and for your children and others in your life. Know thyself, and what I mean by that is watch, observe. If you struggle, watch what comes up for you. Watch what your patterns are, what issues rear up in these situations. Practice celebrating yourself and your family. The you part of you and the you collective part of you. Practice honoring self-care, that it's okay, that it's not selfish to take care of yourself. Selfish is one of those words, kind of like the word victim, that we use to shame people into compliance with what we believe. I'm going to say that again. Selfish or selfishness, like the word victim, is often a word that is used to compel, to shame other people into compliance and conformity. We have to surround ourselves with people who honor ourselves and our self-care enough to compete with those messages that most of us have internalized. That's what our parents do. They call us names and tell us things about ourselves when they feel inadequate, when we're getting too big for them, to get us back into a shape and a size that they can tolerate more. Practice mindfulness, all of it. You're not good or bad, you're all of it. The key to healing is not, the key to this work is not convincing yourself that you're great. It's accepting that you're great and not great, that you're kind and unkind, and that you can have compassion for those pieces that show up in those ways. And that compassion for all of you, although we fear that compassion is like a master that has abdicated their responsibility to keep us in line, right? We need a good butt kicking in our minds to stay in line. It doesn't have that effect. It has just the opposite. It tends to facilitate and encourage love and compassion for others. Facing dragons is serious business. And I don't know what that word is on that slide because it's so poorly misspelled, I can't even imagine it. But facing dragons is serious business, and it's the only way I know how to defeat them. And sometimes I run from them. But when I face them, they'll get smaller. And so practicing taking a step to take care of yourself. Just recently, I took a step in my relationships to assert myself very kindly, very gently with somebody, fearing how they might react because what it could trigger in them. And because of my training, which I share with many, if not most people, I anticipated their reaction to be something about me. And it's not. It's not. Along with your loyalty toward family, remember to be loyal to yourself, to your inner child, to who you are deep down inside. And then say some things and see how it goes. And if it goes badly, like the example from my mother's therapy session with her parents, you still learn something. That still can be valuable. All right, I have time for a few questions, so about 12 minutes left. My son flew in for Thanksgiving, somebody writes, and the Thanksgiving day itself went well. But then on Friday night, he had a meltdown. No one else in the family wants him here for Christmas, and I'm even struggling with it myself. I know he feels like he is alone. Any suggestions? I saw this question because you were the first one to submit one, and I thought that's a really hard question. My answer is I can't tell you what to do, except for remember the two goals are having a sense of self and holding space for other people. But you can only do what you can do. So I assume, of course, that your son is a young adult or an adult, or else he wouldn't be flying home for holidays. You're allowed to make decisions. You know, it goes back to the idea that you don't get to win. This question is an unwinnable question. You can talk about it ahead of time. Maybe you can set some ground rules ahead of time. But in terms of the big decisions, you can't win. You can only choose how to lose. So I think processing it, I think talking about it, asking questions, getting curious, finding out his perspective, see if in those discussions with your genuine curiosity, you can create some guidelines or ground rules or some ways to interrupt it from going the way that it went before can be helpful. Definitely. But instead of maybe solving the behavior first, ask questions, get curious, find out his perspective, and genuinely listen to understand, not to fix or convince. Those are some thoughts I would offer. Somebody says, what if two members of your family have conflicts and are unable to communicate? I understand how both are feeling, but cannot help them initiate a conversation. Both are stuck, father and son. You guys are getting good at these questions. You ask great questions that are difficult to answer. You get to find your place in it, right? You get to find your place in it. You know, I grew up in a home of divorce. I grew up in a home where my mother and my father couldn't stand each other, couldn't be in the same room. Even during important rituals and celebrations, they found it difficult to be in the same room. So something I was trained to do by my circumstances was to figure out how to love two people who didn't love each other. And what you don't want to do, I think, is you don't want to get in the middle. You don't want to try to be the go-between, the peacemaker. And set your boundaries and let them both know that you're going to have to learn to love them separately. If they're unwilling or unable to figure out how to get along, and that you might have to step away, you might have to remove yourself in situations, or even in larger circumstances where you would rather not put yourself in that situation. But it's really difficult to love two people who can't figure it out. But we don't help it by getting in the middle and trying to fix it ourselves. In this case, if the father is your husband, which I'm assuming he is, you can have some pretty frank discussions with him about being the adult and see if he's open to it, but he might not be. He might not be. Asking the son to tiptoe around dad's defenses, to accommodate dad, and I'm sure he has grievances towards his father, that can also be risky, because children are often raised with the idea that they have to navigate our defenses to maintain a sense of belonging and safety. And that can come at quite a cost. The cost really is the authentic self. Somebody says, this might be a minor question, but I find myself consumed by thoughts of what, if any, gifts I should buy for my son who is currently in wilderness therapy. How do families deal with this? Talk to your child's therapist first, but I always suggested something meaningful, like a picture book. Something that didn't have a lot of monetary value. It's rough going out there in the wilderness, and so you don't want to give them nice things anyway. And wilderness therapy is expensive, secondly. And so I liked picture books. I liked letters, gathering letters from relatives, and offering them. You don't have to make a big to-do. This is kind of the moment of moments where it's the thought that counts more than anything. This is one of those moments where that is more true than any other time. The holidays in wilderness therapy is so special and challenging at the same time. The days that I've spent out on Christmas and Hanukkah and Thanksgiving with my students have been some of the most special days of my life. I remember those holidays vividly. A holiday story. Is there something symbolically, some kind of family tradition that you can offer? You don't want to go too far. You don't need to buy a lot. We'll get them the food. They'll have plenty of good holiday food, whether it's Hanukkah or Christmas or other holidays to celebrate. Thank you. It's not a minor question. It's an important one. Somebody says, is it better to avoid meeting with the relatives and friends if I know I will have a hard time when they ask about my daughter who's at Evoke right now? I think that's up to you. You might be, I guess part of it is, this is the question that I would pose to you and to all of you. Are you allowed in your family to say, I don't want to talk about it? That's a really important boundary that you get to have in life. Are your children allowed to say, I don't want to talk about it? Are they allowed to take a time out? And so it's up to you. If it's going to feel, my answer is, of course you can take time away. Of course you don't have to go. Nobody, including me, gets to tell you what the right thing to do is. You get to do what feels right to you, which feels honoring to you from you. And if family becomes reactive and tries to talk you out of it and impose their idea or belief, it only reinforces the very thing that you're doing to protect yourself. The thing you're protecting yourself from, excuse me. Somebody writes, my son has been away for 18 months, so this is his second Christmas and birthday away from home. He's been at Evoke for 7 weeks. I would really like to reward him and allow him to be home for the holidays. Selfishly, I want him to be here as well, but ultimately want what is best for him on his journey. How far can I push this with his therapist? Family is an important value for me. I'm the executive clinical director of Evoke and the co-founder and co-owner. You're allowed to do anything you want with your child. We don't hold your child against what you want. You get to do it. And you don't have to, You don't have to fight for the therapist's approval. You don't have to prove anything to the therapist or to me. I mean, I would encourage you to have an honest discussion with yourself and explore it. Again, I would encourage the spirit of curiosity with the therapist. But in the end, if it's what you need to do, here's the thing: when my son went to treatment when he was younger, and eventually when we decided as a family that it was time for him to come home, people said to me, "He's not done." And I said, "I know he's 14. I'm not done. I know he's not done at 14. I'm not ready for him to come home because he's done. I'm ready for him to come home because we're ready." And it was hard and challenging and not perfect. And I was ready. I was ready to do the work. And I had, at that point in my life, committed to a whole lot of therapy, a whole lot of work in my own life. So you don't have to please or live up to anybody, including me or your therapist's idea about what you should do. Have discussions. Try to be honest with yourself. Talk to your therapist. All of you. This is for all of you, not just in wilderness therapy, but if your therapist is reactive, if your therapist has judgments, if your therapist thinks they know what's right for you, get a new therapist. In the foreword of my book, Jamie Gill says that if your therapist thinks they have the right answer, get a new therapist. An adequate therapist won't want the right answer. They'll want your answer. So I just invite you to be open, honest with yourself, to look at the issues. But at the end of the day, you don't have to prove anything to anybody, including me or them. Our oldest daughter wants to drink in our otherwise sober home during Christmas. We have two other children, aged 22 and 30, who are sober. We provide no alcohol, and she finds it offensive and exclusive to her. Thoughts? I mean, it's your home. If it's a dry home, it's a dry home. Often people that are sober don't want people to drink, to go without, just for them. So I would talk to your 22 and 30-year-old and see how they feel about it. I mean, if you feel that way about it, that's great. But if you're doing it because you don't want them to trigger your 22, 30-year-old, that might not be your job, your duty, your responsibility. So I would talk to all people involved. And if you have a dry and a sober home, and that's your boundary, you're allowed to limit that. So, that's a very common question actually in Utah for people. And people make different decisions with it. And you're allowed to make the one that you want to make. I'd explore it again. I'd explore it with my personal therapist to see if I'm setting a boundary and need to honor it, or if I'm trying to control somebody else. Last question. Year after year, all events, seasonal, vacations, birthdays are desired. Request but set off triggers. Longing to be together, but deadly. Can it ever change? Deadly. I don't mean to paint too dark of a picture, folks, at all. If the holidays are joy-filled for you and yours, and everybody feels gratitude and happiness, I'm happy for you. I'm trying to help you navigate the choppy, stormy waters. Give you some permission if you find those things challenging. But if the holidays are joy-filled and conflict-free and everybody's happy, then do it. But this is a journey. Our work is not a destination. It is a journey. And I don't know anybody who finishes it. But that doesn't mean that they're hopeless and that they're suffering day after day. In fact, they're hopeful because they have a project. That's the whole idea here about this work at Evoke, is not that you fix it, but that you know what your project is. Right? All right. Upcoming events. If you would like to attend a Finding You, we do them online. We also do them in person. I'm going to be running the one January 6th in person. So if you want to sign up for that, do that. We have them also online January 13th. The schedule is on our website. or email intensives@evoketherapy.com. We're going to be scheduling a Finding You 2, which means you have to have been to a Finding You. The next one will be in person in the spring, April 28th through May 2nd. So hopefully by that time, the pandemic will have taken a large bite out of it with the vaccines that are coming out. If you want a Pursuits adventure trip anywhere in the world, think Therapy Light, think Sober Adventure, young adults or families, the Pursuits trips are a great way to kind of combine a little bit of therapeutic support with fun adventures all around the world. Those are custom designed. We have support groups for alumni parents. We have support groups for alumni of our intensive program. So again, consult our website. The next parent online support group for Wilderness parents is December 3rd at 6:30 p.m. And for intensive alumni is December 8th. Of course, these webinars, you can go to our website and find the webinars. You can always email malia@evoketherapy.com for more information. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups, any combination, Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, Adult Children. Also, refugerecovery.org and NAMI.org are other organizations with local chapters in communities that can provide you with free support. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer. On Twitter and Instagram, you can find us there. You can find @Evoke Therapy on Twitter and Instagram and @Evoke Therapy Intensives on Instagram. You can also search us on Facebook by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. Big announcement. We need board members. The board is going through nearly 100% turnover. Might be 100% turnover. So the Evoke Family Foundation Board, a board that exists to raise money to help support people that can't afford therapy. If you have an interest, reach out to malia@evoketherapy.com. Also, our Evoke Therapy blog is always available. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon. Also, like I said earlier, the audiobook for the new book, The Audacity to Be You, is out now on Amazon, Audible, iTunes, and I did the narration myself. Thank you for joining me tonight. The next broadcast will be December 3rd. I'll be going back to my series, talking about the chapters in my book separated by a question and answer. So December 3rd, 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time, The Audacity to Be You, Chapter 4, Love That Makes a Difference. Look forward to that one. Thank you for joining me this evening. I hope it's a helpful point of contact. I hope you're having a safe time as the pandemic is spiking. Please be safe and careful out there, and take care, folks. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.